Kuro Kumogakure was an ugly, useless bum loser who lived as a NEET in a rundown apartment, but was secretly a ninja working for an organization called NIN. However, all that changed when he was given a new mission to infiltrate a high school, even though he looked like a middle-aged man. One afternoon, Kuro joined 3 other students on the rooftop of the school building, and from their interaction, it was obvious he knew the one wearing glasses. Well, that, and the fact that he referred to him as 𝐒𝐍 and ignored his greeting to remove the gum that stuck under his feet. After the girl introduced herself as Suzuki, Kuro asked 𝐒𝐍 why he'd asked them to meet on the roof. 𝐒𝐍 told him it was because it made them look cool, but Kuro pointed out to the empty-headed fool that they could easily be taken out by a sniper. Just then, Shion, who was holding a teddy bear for some reason, pointed out that their enemy was already waiting as he pointed to the opposite rooftop. He explained that they worked for the government and were known as rear enders. 𝐒𝐍 insisted on taking them on first, but Kuro told him to back down and asked Shion who the rear enders' strongest fighter was. Shion told him it was the girl who had a painted face, so Kuro took off his blazer and went to face off with her. Weeks before that, Kuromu was in his apartment practicing how to shoot his poison darts when he got a visitor. The man was dressed like a delivery man, but he was a ninja called Kato, and he had come to assign Kuro a mission. After Kato left, Kuro opened the package he dropped off and found a school uniform, along with a grey hoodie. He put on the hoodie, which also served as a sort of ninja combat attire, and went down to make a call. However, he changed his mind and went in search of Kawado, his neighbor, so she could speak to the school on his behalf. When he found her, she was in the toilet, and she asked him to come in so he could pass her the toilet paper. Kuro realized she was drunk, so he climbed onto the wall to avoid looking at her directly. However, after he picked it up, she threw her slipper at him because he turned to face her, and she was too drunk to remember she'd invited him in. After that, she helped him speak to the school and arranged for him to write the entrance exams. In return, he stole all the beer his neighbor had in his fridge and shared it with Kawado. The both of them spent the rest of the day drinking and chatting, so by the time evening rolled around, Kawado was fast asleep. Kuro picked her up and took her back to her room, but left all the empty beer cans there. After returning to his room, he opened a false floor and hid inside it, so when his neighbor came to accuse him of stealing his beer, the room was empty. The next morning, Ono, his neighbor, accused Kawado of stealing his beer, but she told him she had no idea what he was talking about. However, he insisted they were his and showed her his name, which he'd written at the bottom of the can. Kawado then threatened to report him to the police for stealing her underwear, so he shut up. Back in the present, Kuro approached Meiko with nothing but his hoodie, while she pulled out her dagger and took a defensive stance. Kuro told her not to waste her time, but she claimed her dagger was sharp enough to cut through his hoodie. Kuro simply asked her to look at the back of her hand, which had a red light pointed directly at it from Shion's teddy bear. He then explained that as long as the light touched her, Nin could shoot her down with its orbiting laser known as Escape. Meiko looked visibly scared, but she charged at him anyway, and Kuro dodged it. Meanwhile, Kato and Ozu were in Kati's delivery truck outside, and Kato talked about the foreigner, Kuro, and the others who were assigned to capture. The man had come to Japan hoping to make contact with ninjas. However, he had no idea where to begin looking for them. One day, he stumbled upon a symbol on a light pole, which he believed had been written by ninjas. As he went about searching for something more like it, he found a note taped to the wall, and since he couldn't read it, he took a picture. He sent the picture to his contact, who told him he had to cut off a few peeing rods if he wished to be noticed by the ninjas. Later that night, Kuro walked in on Ono trying on one of Kawado's bras. Kuro made the man share some of his booze with him before he agreed to listen to the reason he had Kawado's bra. Ono told him that he'd seen it hanging from a drown a few days back, so he took it off but had the feeling someone was watching him. When he looked down, he saw a ghostly face staring back at him, which scared the living daylight out of him. Kuro then cut him off and said it wasn't a ghost, but a young boy who had a habit of watching Kawado while she slept. The next day, Kayado woke up to the news about a man who got his dipstick cut off by an unknown assailant around their apartment. That same evening, the dong chopper, also known as the foreigner, cut off Sasama's rod while he took a piss. However, he soon realized he'd been tricked into cutting a real sausage, after which Sasama jumped over his back. He then crawled up a wall before he came back down to the ground. The man immediately knew he was a ninja, so he pulled out a knife which Sasama recognized as something only a Russian assassin would use. The foreigner charged at him, but Sasama managed to subdue him and disarm him. He also pushed him back with his butt so he could escape, but the man pulled out a small gun and shot at him. However, it didn't harm him, and Sasama just stood looking like an idiot before he said some words that turned his upper body invisible. This surprised the man, so he lowered his weapon, which allowed Sasama to run away without getting shot. Hours before that encounter, Kato walked in on Kuro trying on Kawado's bra, and he made sure he knew what he thought about him with the look of disgust he gave him. He then sat down and told Kuro that he had a side mission which he had to complete in 3 days. He said he had to capture a foreigner and gave him a box with a baton in it to help with the mission. Back in the present, Kuro grabbed Meiko's arm before he jumped over the railing and used her to stop himself from falling, which led to her arm getting dislocated. Meanwhile, Kato and Ozu were still conversing in the delivery truck, but Kaito turned him out as he recalled his conversation with Sasama. The crazy old man had told him that he had resigned because he got tired. He told him that he found it suspicious that more than half of the NIN operatives were either working outside the country or currently unemployed. Right before he suddenly disappeared, he told Kato he was sure the government was working with NIN's enemy. This enemy happened to be another faction of ninjas known as UN or Under Ninja. Days later, the boy who Kuro told Ono was the one who stole Kawaso's bra returned to their apartment complex to steal another one. However, Kuro had expected him to do so and was waiting for him, so as soon as he saw him, he used a taser on him. When the boy woke up, he was in a room, and the dirty-minded sock addict began to imagine he was in a room with a half-naked Kawado. However, when he realized he was in Ono's room, he let out a sigh, and Ono told him he'd found him passed out outside with a bra in his hands. Kuro soon joined them and pretended he had no idea what had happened to the boy, and offered him some pickled eggplant. After a while, Kawado came into the room, and when she saw the boy, she asked who he was. The boy became scared that Ono would reveal his secret, but Kuro surprised him by telling Kawado he'd come to return her bra, which he found outside. Later on, when he was about to leave, Kuro warned him not to steal underwear anymore and asked what his name was. He told him he was Eita, and when he mentioned he was a high schooler, Kuro threatened to call the cops. Eita begged him not to, so Kuro agreed to let him go on the condition that he find the foreigner who was chopping people's sausages off. He also promised to give him a picture of Kawado fast asleep in her underwear. When he got home, he met Juna, his neighbor's daughter, and she asked if she could borrow his drone. At first he refused, but eventually agreed to let her use it if she found the foreigner for him. The very next day she found him in the temple and brought him home with her so she could feed him. Back in the present, Suzuki attacked Meiko's friends with a steel ball gun and told them to surrender, which they did. Back in the past, Juna took the foreigner to Eita's house and demanded he give her the drone since she fulfilled her part of the bargain. Eita gave it to her, and as she played with it, he called Kuro to inform him that he had found the man. At the same time, Suzuki was posing as an editor for a writer named Professor Yoshida who lived in the same building. While she was there, she received information that the foreigner was there, so she left to take care of him. Elsewhere, Hibi's manager informed him about his new mission, which also happened to be capturing the foreigner. Back at the apartment complex, the foreigner noticed Suzuki and shot at her. She managed to protect herself with her bag, but he kept track of her movements with the camera on the drone. This forced her to activate her invisibility suit, which by the way only worked on her clothes, leaving her hands, legs and head completely exposed. However, the foreigner was as dumb as a bird, so she managed to fool him until she got the chance to kick him. She also shot him with her taser, but he managed to use his gun against her. Fortunately, her suit was bulletproof. However, it gave him the upper hand, and just as he was about to fire another shot, Hibi arrived and challenged him. With the foreigner's attention on Hibi, Suzuki crawled out of sight and stole the drone controller when the man dropped it. As the man fought Hibi, she used the drone to attack, so Hibi threatened to destroy it if she didn't show herself, but Eita begged him not to. Meanwhile, both Suzuki and Hibi's managers were standing outside speaking to one another when Sasama sneaked up on them. He told them to be careful as they had enemies everywhere, but he suddenly kept quiet when he noticed a black car drive by. However, the car wasn't the reason he went silent, as he'd sensed Kuro, who was clinging to the side of it as soon as it drove by. As soon as the car stopped, the driver came out and started screaming at Yuna, asking why she wasn't inside the house. From her reaction, the foreigner realized it was her father, just as Kuro shot a dart at Hibi. Hibi managed to catch it before it hit him, but couldn't dwell on where it had come from because the foreigner suddenly attacked Yuna's father. He then got into his car and tried to run Hibi over with it twice, but he jumped over the car easily. When he stopped the car, he opened the door and tried to shoot Yuna's father, but seeing the scared look on her face made him reconsider. As he drove off, he suddenly realized he wasn't alone, but before he could react, Kuro disarmed him and pushed him out of the car. Before anyone would see him, he latched onto the side of Kati's delivery truck and returned home. Later that day, the foreigner was taken to a swampy area by Tiara, Ozu and Sasama, who revealed to be a woman walking around in an old man's suit. The foreigner thought they had taken him there to get rid of him, but Sasama told him the higher-ups wanted him to work for them. She said it was because they had recognized his skills and ability and didn't want to waste it. However, he had to say goodbye to his former life as well as his daughter, so they made him call his contact. He told the man he had found the ninja, but as they were speaking, the man's leg was suddenly cut off, and the baby was taken from him after he was stabbed. Back in the present, as Kuro stood with only half his body visible, he had no idea a girl named Sato saw him, and as she wondered if she should let anyone know what she saw, she bumped into Noguchi. When the two started talking, they noticed Kuro walking out of the building, and Sati asked Noguchi if she knew him personally. Sato's question made her recall the day she'd met Kuro, which also happened to be the day he wrote his exams. She had come for extra lessons, so the teacher had put them both in the same class. However, the seat Kuro had chosen had a perfect view of the floor where Shion had arranged seeds, which represented the answers to the exams. Shion had come to him the previous day and told him about it, so when he entered the classroom, he made sure to find them. Unfortunately, Noguchi had noticed them and made a fuss about them looking like bugs. Kuro played along and told the teacher the seeds were eggs from a toxic insect, hoping he would leave them alone. But luck wasn't on his side as Noguchi kept complaining, so the teacher asked her to get a broom. As the teacher swept, Kuro tried to save the remaining answers, so he peed on himself. Noguchi found it disgusting and the teacher asked Kuro to go clean himself up, but as soon as he stepped outside he began to cry. He told the teacher he had been so nervous that he drank so much water, which was why he couldn't hold himself. He also told the teacher he couldn't continue the exam and made him agree to only grade him using what he had been able to answer. At the end of the day, Noguchi followed Kuro home and he introduced Kawado to her as his mother, after which he asked her questions about the school. Noguchi told him what she knew and also added that their director was a strange man. The next week, Kuro managed to convince Eita to return to school, and on their way, he stopped by to pick up Noguchi, who called him a stalker. It was at school that he ran into Hibi, who took him to the rooftop where he met Suzuki and Shion and got into a fight with Mako. Meanwhile, Eita was helping Yamada, a girl from his class, carry a box, but he secretly hoped she wanted to confess her love to him since she had never spoken to him before that day. Unfortunately, his hopes were crushed when he found out she'd fooled him into coming to speak with Azuma and Noheji, who loved to bully him. Azuma accused him of spreading malicious rumors about him, and as Eita argued with them, Kuro walked up to them with a cardboard box over his upper body. Azuma tried to look under that cardboard box to find out who dared to interfere with his business, but Kuro knocked him out by twisting his neck. He used Eita's left hand to stop Noheji's attack before using the right to punch him in the face. As Eita nursed his hand, Kuro asked where he could find the director, and he told him to check the boiler room. Kuro went there and found the director, who suddenly attacked him with a katana. Thanks to his quick reflexes and hoodie, he blocked it and blew a dart at the director, but he deflected it with his katana. The man commended him for his skill, and in return Kuro warned him not to attack again else he'd lose his arm. He explained that Escape had a lock on their location and would take him out if he did. The director didn't believe it until he tried to strike again, and a laser beam cut his katana in half. Later that day, Kawada was woken up by a cat she always fed, and while it ate, she turned on the television to watch her show. When the cat looked at the screen, it suddenly remembered it was one of the people from the show. He remembered he'd been cut down by a ninja, and also remembered a doctor saying his brain would be transplanted. As he lay on the bed wondering how they managed to transplant his brain into a cat, Kuro walked by. Kawado stopped him, and while she was speaking to him, the cat looked into his eyes and remembered that the ninja who cut him down had the same eyes as Kuro. This made him take a defensive stance, so Kawado picked him up and calmed him down. The next day at school, Noheji called Eita outside and begged him to introduce him to Kuro. The next moment, Kuro popped out of nowhere, so Noheji begged for his help to fight some guys from another school. Meanwhile, Kato went to Kuro's apartment claiming to have a package for him, so Ono agreed to take it. While he spoke to Ono, Oniboke snuck into Kuro's room to search for anything out of the ordinary. After they left the apartment, she told him she had found a hidden bunker and said the table was some sort of shield. Kato told her that Ono's memories seemed to have been altered when it came to Kuro, which was very suspicious and raised more questions for them. Back in school, Noheji told Kuro about his plan to teach some students at Yankee High School a lesson. Hibi soon walked by and found the trio talking, so he asked what was going on, and Kuro told him about the fight. As soon as he heard about it, he agreed to go along with them, so they made a plan which involved Yamada for some reason. That night, Eita went to the convenience store to buy some things, and as soon as he left, a ninja in an invisible suit walked in. The owner sensed something was wrong and pulled out her katana, but before she could react, he stabbed her in the neck. When she tried to strike him, his suit prevented him from getting cut, but the force pushed him back. He then got up and walked around the counter where he finished her off completely. As he stared at her lifeless body, he began to laugh like a maniac and recalled how he'd been recruited. It turned out he was once a NIN agent, but he'd gone rogue and had been captured by a UN agent who he begged to spare his life. It was then he struck a deal and agreed to work for the UN as long as he was allowed to murder people. Back in the present, he left the convenience store and began looking for his next victim. He soon ran into Suzuki, who was on the lookout for him after receiving news about the death of the store owner, who was also a NIN agent. Immediately he attacked her. She shielded herself with her bag, after which she threw a net on top of him. She then pulled out her baton and waited for him to strike again, but Juna walked close to them at that moment. The little girl had no idea her life was in danger and would have died if she hadn't bent down to pick up the cat that walked up to her. Suzuki then told the agent that she would put down her weapons as long as he didn't harm the girl. However, she pulled out a pen from her pocket, which also happened to be a poison dart she wanted to use against him. As she planned her next move, the cat suddenly started speaking to the man, who for some reason understood the cat's language. The cat called him Saruta, and he asked the cat if he was Nekohira, which it confirmed. Jenna found the whole thing strange, so she told Suzuki she was hearing voices, and Suzuki asked Saruta not to harm Juna. As soon as Nekohira heard her voice, he told Saruta who she was and who did not believe him. Nekohira explained that even though her face had changed, he still remembered what she smelled like from their days in school. This made Saruta recall how she'd turned down his love confession and how he later discovered she'd used him to get high grades. Back in the present, Nekohira's human memories receded and his cat mind made him walk away. Saruta then called out to Suzuki and promised to get rid of her at her school because that was where she deserved to die. Meanwhile, the NIN operatives were trying to find out what had happened in the store, but were only left with more answers. The next day, Kato and Ozu went to see Sasama, but Taira held a katana to his neck. He then asked him why Onikobe was back in Japan and working with him, but Sasama ordered him to drop it. Meanwhile, Suzuki went to Oniboke, and the two girls got into a fight but eventually sorted things out. Back in the swamp, Sasama informed Kato and the others that the attack was carried out by someone wearing the UN's latest suit. She also told them that the baby beside her was Tara, the leader of the 7 NIN officers, which surprised everyone but Kato. She explained that his brain had been successfully transplanted into the baby, but he had yet to regain his ability to speak. She then asked Kato why he'd been working behind her back with Onikobe, but he said nothing. This made her tell him she was willing to overlook his insubordination on the condition that he prove his loyalty. At the same time, NIN agents in invisible suits surrounded Onikobe and Suzuki. Sasama told Kato to prove his loyalty to NIN by crawling between the Rainbow Hound's legs, so he got on his knees. However, he hesitated a bit, causing Sasama to ask if his pride was too much for him to do such a thing. When he didn't respond, she told him that refusal to do it was the refusal to swear loyalty to Tara and NIN. Still, Kato said nothing, but he did as she ordered him to and crawled between the Rainbow Hound's legs. As soon as he did this, the NIN agents surrounding Suzuki and Onikobe suddenly disappeared. Later that night, as Noguchi lay in bed, she screamed in fear when she opened her eyes and found Kuro staring at her. When she confirmed he wasn't someone out to cause her harm, she asked how he'd gotten into her room. Kuro told her he'd climbed in through the window, and she told him if the school found out he'd be expelled. Kuro told her not to worry as the school would be gone soon and asked her not to go to school the next day. Noguchi asked why, but he didn't bother to explain things to her and walked out of the room to the balcony. She went after him and tried to get him to stay, but Kuro told her he was tired before he jumped down. Meanwhile, in Professor Yoshida's house, he decided to go to bed but made sure to unlock his door and windows before he lay down. This was something he'd been doing for the past 10 years because of an encounter he had with a ninja. The ninja had asked him to close his eyes and listen to what he had to say without asking any questions. The ninja told him about a hostage situation that had taken place a few years before, in which one of the hostages died. He said that the public was aware that the remaining hostages had been saved by a special task force. However, what they didn't know was that an hour before the rescue operation, 7 ninjas, including him, infiltrated the building. It was after the ninjas disarmed the terrorists that the operation began, but the ninjas' true objective was to get rid of a high-ranking official among the hostages. Unfortunately, when the operation began, the ninjas had to face off against the soldiers, and only 2 made it out alive. As soon as the ninja finished telling his story, he vanished, and Yoshida wondered if he'd told him about it because he wanted the world to know. Since he couldn't ask more questions, he wrote about it and published the book which readers believed was fiction. However, soon after the publication of his book, different ninjas found their way into his home and told him stories only they knew about. things the public wasn't aware of and still believed were works of fiction whenever he published them. One day, he received an unusual visitor, who turned out to be a lady, but her presence scared the hell out of Yoshida. She was also the only one who didn't speak of past events, as she told him she would get rid of all the ninja. The following day, Kuro was on his way out when he called Hibi to inform him that there was going to be an attack at Kodan. However, he said a separate unit would take care of it, while both of them went after the real target. At the same time, Eita and Yamada came out of his apartment and began making their way to Yankee High School. On their way out, they passed by Yoshida, who trembled in fear as soon as Yamada walked past him, and he swore to himself that she was the mysterious lady who once visited him. As the two of them made their way to the bridge, Eita told Yamada that Yankee High was responsible for most of the crimes that happened in the city. Unfortunately, his words were heard by a cholesterol pappy and a low-budget delinquent who were both students of Yankee High School. They told Eita that he had to pay for dissing their school, even though everything he'd said was true, which made him scared. Yamada then turned towards them and asked them to let Eita go, hinting that he was her boyfriend. The boys refused to believe an ugly-ass loser like Eita bagged a hottie like Yamada, but told her they would let him go if she showed them her underwater. Yamada agreed, but asked them to move closer so they could see clearly, which they did. But instead of flashing them her panties, she kneed the one closest to her in the head. Then she used Eita's head to slam into the second one, after which they begged her to stop. As they lay on the floor, she told them about the raid Kuro was planning and told Eita to follow her. Later on, the two Yankee students met Hibi and Kuro in a shop, and while Kuro collected a package from the owner, Hibi questioned them. Instead of telling him what happened, they told him a guy had beat them up and told them about the raid. They were very surprised when Kuro confirmed it and asked them to come along with them. Meanwhile, Yamada and Eita had already gotten to Yankee High, and Eita looked like he'd piss his pants any second. Yamada then asked him to hold her hand, which he did, but she surprised him by grabbing his hands and placing them on her non-existent plots as she ran into the premises screaming. The poor boy was so confused he wasn't sure if he should be happy he got the chance to touch his class-top baddie or compare her pebbled landscape to Kawado's massive melons. His thoughts were soon cut off by a teacher who approached them and asked what the problem was. Yamada then flipped Eita over her shoulder and used his legs to knock the man out cold, leaving Eita to wonder if he'd gotten mixed up in shady business. Elsewhere, Ranran carried out her analysis for the UN Marushitan suit and compared it to the ones NIN operatives had. She told manager Tyra that the UN suit was way more advanced than theirs, as she showed him footage of the attack at the convenience store. While she spoke, the cultured sleazeball put his grubby hands down her shirt, but she didn't seem to mind, and even offered to go somewhere more private. This made him pull his hand out and ask her to share her findings with Kato as he was on his way to Kando, where Saruta was going to attack. She agreed, but couldn't help but shake the feeling that the UN suit had some other purpose it was meant to serve. At the same time, Shion, who was naked in bed with Mako, received a call from Ozu warning him of the attack on Kando. Elsewhere in the building, Suzuki also received a call from Ranran, who informed her that Saruta's suit had no weaknesses. Ranran then asked about Onikobe, who was standing beside her in her invisible suit, so Suzuki held up the phone for her. Immediately she did that, Ranran wasted no time in telling Onikobe that she hoped she died during the mission. As soon as the call disconnected, Kato's call came in, and he informed them that they wouldn't be held accountable for whatever they did during the mission. Meanwhile, outside the school premises, Azuma was on his way into the school when Saruta beheaded him for no reason whatsoever. In another part of the school premises, Noguchi approached the director and asked about the underground tunnels she'd heard rumors about. The man told her they were real and advised her to make use of them if she wanted to survive. As he walked away, she began to wonder if he'd lost a few screws in his head. A few minutes later, Ranran called Suzuki again to let her know that Saruta had already infiltrated the school, as their satellite had picked up the image of a dead body outside the school. Meanwhile, Saruta had just beheaded a teacher and was making his way to the classrooms when he saw Mako's friends bullying another student. He then rolled the teacher's head towards them to get their attention, before he cut down the first one. The second one tried using the boy as a shield, but Saruta cut off her lower body and used her knife to pin her upper body to the boy. He told the boy to make a run for it if he didn't want to end up dead, so he ran off. After the boy ran off, he took the teacher's head and walked into the classroom still in his invisible form. However, the students didn't freak out like he'd hoped they would when they saw the floating head, so he began cutting them down. As they scrambled to get away from the supposedly haunted classroom, Saruta escaped to the boys' bathroom. There he found a boy, who he spared because he realized he was having lunch there. Meanwhile, the boy who he'd told to run made it to the teacher's office, and immediately, the vice principal instructed the students to head to the courtyard. However, the director took over the speakers and instructed them to stay inside their classrooms. He also told Suzuki that the best way for them to track Saruta down was to work with him, so she agreed. While all that was happening, Kuro, 𝐒𝐵, and the two idiots Yamada had beaten up on the bridge arrived at Yankee. They met 𝐒𝐔𝐁𝐒𝐂𝐑𝐈𝐏𝐍 there, and he pointed out the teacher who was passed out in the yard, just as Eita called out to them. When they looked up, he was at the edge of the roof with his hands bound behind him, begging them to save him. Meanwhile, Kato arrived at Konda High School and barricaded the entrance with delivery trucks, after which he released a cardboard robot. Inside the school, the director's voice could still be heard telling the students to return to their classrooms, and Saruta wasn't too pleased with it. Just then, his attention was drawn outside by a student who noticed the robot and pointed it out. Saruta looked out the window and recognized it as the cube, which was only used for international missions. Since he was invisible, the boy had no idea who was speaking and tried to walk away, but Saruta suddenly struck him down, causing the class to go into panic mode as the bloodthirsty psycho laughed at how much chaos he was making. Back at Yankee, Kuro and 𝐒𝐵 made their way onto the roof and began taking off their blazers and ties so they could put on their hoodies. While they were doing so, Yamada approached them, which surprised them as they hadn't sensed her presence at all until she made herself known. At Konda, Kota activated the weapons system on the delivery trucks as the robot stood guard outside waiting for Saruta. Inside, 𝐒𝐂𝐑𝐈𝐏𝐍 suggested she and Suzuki split up in the connecting hallways and trap the deranged son of a bitch in the middle. As Suzuki made her way through the halls, she tried her best to hide her disgust at the smell of the teenagers scattered around. The next moment, one of their teachers arrived and asked all the students to return to their classrooms, but Suzuki suddenly heard screaming. She immediately turned around with her baton in her hand ready to strike, but the person turned out to be 𝐒𝐂𝐑𝐈𝐏𝐍. Saruta, on the other hand, was directly behind the teacher, and he wasted no time in decapitating him. Suzuki used her bag to block the head that flew her way, and unfortunately left herself exposed. Saruta used that chance to cut off her left leg, after which he told her she would be the last one to die. He then went after 𝐒𝐂𝐑𝐈𝐏𝐍, who blocked his attack, and as she struggled against him, Kato broke through the wall using the robot and grabbed Saruta by his neck. He then ordered 𝐒𝐂𝐑𝐈𝐏𝐍 to stay back and help the injured while he took care of Saruta, but the sneaky bastard made sure he threw a knife at her leg before the robot walked away. 𝐒𝐂𝐑𝐈𝐏𝐍 picked up Suzuki's leg and told her to head to the ninja lab so she could have it reattached. Suzuki pointed out that she was also in no condition to fight, but 𝐒𝐂𝐑𝐈𝐏𝐍 insisted that she had to assist Kato. Meanwhile, the robot had taken Saruta to an empty stairwell, and Kato asked Ranran to use escape to take him out. Ranran told him it was impossible because she couldn't pinpoint the location and suggested he move outside. Before he could comply, Saruta managed to slip out of the robot's arms and ran away. Back at Yankee, 𝐒𝐵 engaged Yamada in one-on-one combat, but no matter what he did, he couldn't land a hit. She even managed to evade him and attacked him from behind before he had the chance to react. Kuro called out to him and asked him to relax, or else he'd never be able to take her down, so 𝐒𝐵 suggested they test out their strength. Yamada agreed, and the two locked hands in a fierce battle to prove who was stronger. Unfortunately, 𝐒𝐵 had underestimated Yamada until she showed him she was a direct descendant of Baki and nearly crushed his bones. 𝐒𝐵 wasn't ready to accept defeat at the hands of Mrs. Gorilla Grodd, so he used his ace, which happened to be his ability to use electricity. As he stood with his katana drawn, he calculated the best way to get rid of Yamada, knowing fully well he had only one shot. Meanwhile, 𝐒𝐂𝐑𝐈𝐏𝐍 finally made it to the roof and used her scanner to locate Saruta's suit before moving into attack. However, Kato's robot made it up to the roof as well, and he tried to warn her that the suit was empty. Before she could react, Saruta jumped out of his hiding place and stabbed her in the face. Fortunately, she lowered her visor in time to avoid it. Saruta, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky because he'd landed on her katana and was now a human kebab, which made Kato relieved. Unfortunately, his celebration was short-lived as Saruta pressed the button to release the blade into her skull. Back at the ninja lab, Ranran drew the attention of Taira to the footage of 𝐒𝐂𝐑𝐈𝐏𝐍 and Saruta's fight. Since he was a shameless pig, he placed his hand inside her shirt, making her ask if he wanted to find somewhere more private. However, he refused and asked her to explain what she'd learned, so she showed him how 𝐒𝐂𝐑𝐈𝐏𝐍 struck Saruta's empty suit. Taira then asked why she hadn't warned 𝐒𝐂𝐑𝐈𝐏𝐍 that Saruta had set up a trap for her. Ranran told him that her job was to analyze the suit, which she had done, but it was no secret that Ran hated Onikobe and wanted her dead. Ran then explained that the UN suit was a modified spacewalk suit and pulled up a news article about a recent rocket launch. Immediately, Tyra began sweating buckets as he realized the UN's real target was Escape all along. But Ran said what they wanted was the data server inside Escape, which had all the personal information of Nin's 200,000 ninjas stored in it. She immediately suggested he contact the 500 Ninja Committee and ask them to destroy Escape. Tyra did that, and the robots serving the Ninja Committee informed them of the Ninja Lab findings. However, the insufferable old goats were more concerned with how much money they had spent on building Escape. While they were still arguing about whether or not the intel was true, the UN's agent broke into Escape and began copying all the data. As soon as that happened, the committee was notified, so they ordered that the laser be fired at full capacity and the cooling systems inside Escape be disabled. This way, whoever was inside Escape would be cooked from the heat. Back at Yankee High, Kuro swung his sword, but Yamada was quick enough to dodge it, so he only managed to cut off her nose. Immediately, she retaliated and aimed for his head, but he blocked her attack with his katana as well as the airbag function of his hoodie. Unfortunately, the blow had been so strong, he began to bleed from his eyes, so she finished him off by stabbing him through the mouth. At Kadan High, Saruta used his dying breath to tell Kato that on the day he joined the UN, he saw Commander Sasama watching. The next moment, Escape's laser came down and destroyed the entire place along with the students still inside. Ozu immediately made calls to the governor's office and told them to release a report saying the explosion was caused by a gas leak. At the same time, Yamada approached Eita, who was shocked to see her without a nose and was even more shocked by the head she was holding. When she placed it before him, he panicked and kicked it off the roof before he realized it was Kuro. Meanwhile, Tyra informed Ran that the 7 Nin leaders had been assembled to assume operational command. Since they had just lost Escape, which was the ace they had against the UN, everyone was to prepare for an all-out war. He told her that her brother Hibi had retrieved a physiological sample which happened to be Yamada's nose and asked her to analyze it as soon as she received it. He also informed her that because of Onikobe's death, Kato was in trouble and would face the ninja tribunal. Later that evening, while Eita was at Kuro's apartment drinking with Ono and Kawado, they suddenly screamed in fear as they found themselves staring at Kuro. However, it wasn't him, as the young man introduced himself as Juniro, Kuro's younger brother. Meanwhile, Noguchi was in bed trying to sleep when someone crawled under her blanket, which surprised her. Thinking it was Kuro, she quickly looked under the covers, but soon discovered it was Toichi, his younger sister. Back at the apartment, Juniro was reviewing the footage of Kuro's fight when their other brother Juro told him to stop. But Juniro insisted that he could learn something from it that could help them in the future. Do you think Sasama is up to no good? Also, what's the deal with Kuro's siblings looking like his doppelgangers? If you wish to find out, let us know by commenting next. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video. Bye.